afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the U School's presentation of Progressing the Student Conversation, how to isolate, understand, and overcome concerns from students. My name is Jody Ashbrook. I am your host today. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to join me. My goal for our time together is to hopefully bring you some skills and tools and thoughts that might help you the next time you get in the conversation with a student. And it's clear that they have some concerns. They might not be openly sharing them with you, but the indicators tell you that they're hesitant to move forward. And so again, the time that we're going to spend today is helping you how to be able to identify those times in the conversation. Once you've identified them, be able to isolate them, understand them, and then progress the student forward. And I want to highlight that we're progressing the student forward in a way that feels comfortable for them, feels authentic to you, and feels good for the overall student experience. That's really, really important here, important point to recognize. From a human standpoint, we all know when we're feeling pushed to either make a decision or to hear something that maybe we're not ready to hear. And so I want to emphasize that everything that we talk about today is how do we understand the students' concerns and progress that conversation forward in a really responsible, humanistic, compassionate kind of way, that at the end of the day, you hang up the phone feeling really good about your interaction with the student. They hang up the phone feeling really good about their interaction with you as their guide and also the institution. So that's where we're going to go today. Again, my name is Jody Ashbrook. I am co-founder and consultant for Elevate Higher Ed. And the U School was created specifically to focus on providing tools and resources and support for enrollment management teams. My background is in enrollment management, so anything focused from the first point of contact with the student all the way to when that student transitions into class is really my area of expertise. And that's what I'm bringing to you here today. And that's really the purpose, again, of the U School, is to provide that coaching and training both virtually and face-to-face in those areas that are common for us to get stuck in when we're having a conversation with the student. I've been there. I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to be on the phone with a student and have those conversations end in, hey, send me an email, or I can't talk right now, or I'm too busy. Can you relate to what that feels like? I'm sure you can. I'm sure it happens more times during the day than you'd like. And that not only doesn't get you the results that you're looking for, but more importantly, it doesn't feel good for the student and it doesn't feel good for you. We all want to go to our jobs and feel good about the work that we're doing and feel successful about the work that we're doing. If you are in an admissions or an enrollment counselor or leadership type role, you are in that role because you want to help people. You want to make a difference. And hanging up that phone and feeling like you weren't able to make a difference or you weren't able to get through to the student doesn't feel good. And so that's really why I'm passionate about this work and the work that we're talking about related to skill sets and the student conversation. When I say I've been there, I have. My first 6 months as an enrollment counselor, I really, really struggled. I struggled with how to have a conversation. I struggled with being able to talk to students in a way that was meaningful, talk to students in a way that where I was able to understand really what they needed and have that move forward and progress in a constructive way, in a way that was what we both wanted, which is the end goal of them moving forward and enrolling at the institution that I was working for. So that inability to be able to have those conversations and accomplish those goals not only took a toll on my performance, but it also took a toll on my self-confidence and how I was feeling about myself coming into work every day, doing this job over and over and over again and feeling I was getting the same result. So if any of you can relate to that feeling, know that you're not alone, know that it's very normal, and know that also this is where the whole spirit of the U School is coming from, and the purpose of this conversation today and these coaching sessions is The end goal is for us and the student to feel good about the work that we're doing. And there are very specific skill sets that will help you to move toward that end goal and accomplish what you're trying to accomplish with that student conversation. So the conversation structure that I teach usually has six different steps. The one that we're going to focus on today is step 4, which is, again, how do we overcome concerns for the student? And overcome sounds like a really strong word, right? We're kind of, it almost connotates or insinuates that we're pushing the student in a forward direction. And while we are progressing the conversation, the goal is really to isolate and understand. So students' concerns typically come from a couple key areas. And I have a handout that I'll bring up here on the screen in a moment, but they have concerns about the time that it's going to take for them to go back to school. Do they have that kind of time in their schedule? If you work with adult learners, you know exactly what I'm talking about. School is just one more thing that's being added to their plate. And so the time that it's going to take away from their job, their family, their kids' extracurricular activities is a very real concern. How do they have the time to fit in going back to school? So that's one, time. Money. How are they going to pay for school? You know, the money conversation is a very big and real concern, and in a lot of cases, obstacles that students have. What you probably find in your conversations with students is that even though money is very real for all of us, as a concern with how we're going to purchase things, buy things, especially an investment as big as school, a lot of times students won't bring it up. And if they don't bring it up, if we're not in a place of confidence and structure with our conversation, a lot of times we don't bring it up. And so as a result, we end up moving through the conversation at a very surface level, hanging up the phone, and not ever having that cost conversation. It's unrealistic to think that someone's going to walk into a car dealership and say to the salesman, "Yep, I want that car." And the salesman says, "Great. Here are the keys. Bill will be in the mail in 2 weeks. Take it off the lot." If we're being honest with ourselves, no one's going to be comfortable with just a bill coming in the mail and us not really knowing how we're going to pay for it, unless we're all independently wealthy, which, again, if we're honest, that's not typically the conversation that we're having. So to avoid that conversation around money in hopes that it will just go away is not a sound strategy. And I'll tell you from my experience in working with institutions, that's typically what the approach that we take is. We like to pretend that it doesn't exist because it doesn't come up in the conversation. And so as a result, we keep kind of crossing our fingers and hoping and hoping and hoping that the student's going to keep moving through those steps that we need them to move through. And even if they do, even if they fill out an application, they become admitted. Typically what you find happens is if you have not engaged in that conversation around money and really talked about the financial picture for the student and the options that they have to pay for it, then what ends up happening is the student, between the time that they've been admitted to when they start class, something magically comes up to where they can't start school. And your institution probably calls that something different. But either way, we're talking about retention. New student retention. So you typically see, even if you are able to get the student to move through and take all the steps on the front end, I can guarantee that you're going to see that percentage of when the student is supposed to start, that typically drops. So what we're trying to avoid, of course, is having our students go through all of that work and not start class because we haven't done our due diligence by having a conversation around money. And more importantly, that's what understanding that concern around money is really about. You can't hang up that phone and feel good about the conversation that you've had and that conversation really being thorough with the student if you haven't walked through how much it's going to cost, how are they going to pay for that, what are their options, and really taking that time. And that's not a quick 5-minute conversation. Hey, yeah, we talked about money. He or she is good to go. They're going to use this, and this. A lot of times we speed past that because it's uncomfortable for us. And so there will be a whole other coaching session on the cost conversation, because it really is its own animal. The conversation around how to speak to money and cost and overcome that concern, we won't tackle in today's conversation. Quite honestly, it's a 2 or 3 part coaching session because it's so big. So I want to give that the attention that it deserves, because it's a whole other element to the conversation. And it's a large reason, if you're sitting in the seat of being an enrollment or an admissions advisor, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Either you don't talk about it, or the way that you talk about it is to defer to financial aid. And if you put yourself in the student seat as a human being, ask yourself if you would feel comfortable with that being the response that you get when you're looking to make a decision about where to go to school and how you're going to pay for school. Ask yourself if you'd be okay with that answer, if you would move forward with filling out an application, if you would take the next steps. I would venture to say your answer would be probably not, but that's a thought for reflection for you. So we've got time, we've got money, value in the program. And the skill set, the way I usually see value playing out is us thinking of all the wonderful things about the school that we represent and info dumping all these great things on the student. And that's us building value. Raise your hand in your seat if you know what I'm talking about. Chances are you do. Hey, been there, done it. If that's the only way that we know how to build value, then of course that's the way that you're going to build value. One of the things I'll encourage you to think about as we think about isolating and understanding the student's objection is we really need to understand what about the program do they need to know? What about the program or the school is concerning for them? It's almost like you're doing a discovery with the student. Rather than giving them this whole treasure chest of all the wonderful things about XYZ University, take a second with your questions, and that'll be a whole other module that we train on is learning how to ask questions that have relevant meaning. Take a second and ask some of those questions to help you understand what the student needs. Because they might not need all the stuff that you've got bottled up in your treasure chest of XYZ University. They might just need 2 or 3 to feel like they have an understanding and to feel at peace and able to move forward with the decision with your institution. So that's where the isolating and the understanding comes into play. Figure out what they need to know, what's important to them, and then match up all the features and benefits that you have in your toolbox with what's important to them in a way that is specific to them. It's not you just reading off this laundry list of amazing things. It's you really taking the time to understand with your questions. And that's, again, where I see a gap a lot of times in student conversations is we're not even asking questions. We really allow the student to guide that conversation and steer that conversation. And we really provide them that runway to ask all the questions in the world. And we just become a transactional info dumper based off of what their questions are. Really kind of step into the role of being their guide, which is what you are. They are relying on you as the expert. They are relying on you to help them figure out how to make this really important decision. And if you're not taking the time to understand what they need, then it's going to be very challenging for you to provide them the information that's going to be most helpful. So in isolating and understanding, really taking that time so that you can then match up as we talk about things like value and understanding the concern around time, you know, there'll be some ways that you can match up what you have to offer and the way that your program works if you have a solid understanding. The fourth area that we usually see students having concerns that cause them to hesitate and be fearful and not move forward is their own ability to be successful. Similar to money, it is rare that a student will come out and share that with you. And if you think about your student conversations, you know what I'm talking about. If we think about it from a human perspective, as human beings, for whatever reason, we feel challenged to admit that we might not feel super confident in an area. We feel challenged to admit that, hey, this is a weakness for me and I'm scared. How many times have you heard a student actually say that to you? Probably not often. So because that's the case, you being the guide, you being the expert, you being the leader that they are relying on, it is part of your role to bring that up. Let's talk about that. And that can sound something like, hey, student, I've been doing this for a really long time. And a lot of times when I work with students, they have concerns about certain classes or certain subjects, or maybe even how online classes work. And that leads into a really real fear of whether or not they're going to be successful or they're going to be able to complete the class. And I want to put it out there that those are very real feelings. I had very similar feelings about a lot of my statistics courses. So it's common. And I wanted to open that doorway for us in our conversation if that is any part of what you might be feeling that is causing you to be a little bit hesitant. So there's a little bit of a role play for you, some ideas. You can rewind that, listen to it, maybe pick up what resonates with you. But that's a way that you can open the doorway, put out there what they may be feeling that they're not going to tell you. And we know that if they don't tell you what's going on, that conversation ends prematurely every single time. That conversation ends in, hey, send me an email. Hey, I'm not ready. I need to think about it longer. And what are the odds of that student picking up the phone the next time that you call? What are the odds of the student responding to your email? We all know where that goes. We all know how that story plays out. So what I'm offering in this session today is it's critical to bring up these concerns. If you don't, the student's not going to. And even if the student does, and you're not equipped to handle them, that conversation is going to end the same way every time. Take that to another level. The student hangs up the phone. We're not sure how much courage it took for them to fill out that request for information, how long that they've been thinking about this, maybe the feelings of fear or inadequacy that they had to overcome to even take the next step. So they could be getting on the phone with you and you really are their light. You really are their guide. If they hang up the phone and they don't feel that support or they don't feel like there's a way, they may never go back to school. Those feelings or thoughts that they had that maybe somebody planted in their mind that they are not able to are now validated. And I don't say that to put undue pressure on anybody. The reason I share that and say that is the role that you're sitting in, the seat that you're sitting in is so important. And these skills that we're talking about are critical to helping you feel like you can really step into your role and offer that guidance and leadership and support to these students who are relying on you. So just because they don't bring it up doesn't mean they're feeling okay about it. Doesn't mean they don't have a plan or they have a plan. And in fact, what it probably means that this stuff doesn't get brought up is the likelihood that this student is actually going to start, if we never talk about these things, is very slim. You might be talking 1 to 2% of the prospective students that you have in your database. So this conversation is really about empowering you to understand the intensity of your role, the impact that your role can have on another human being. And that's why these conversation skills are so critical and so important. So the 4 areas: time, money, value, ability. These are 4 areas that in some way, shape, or form should be discussed in every new student conversation. And you might find that as a student progresses, you're still continuing to bring these up in different ways to make sure the student feels comfortable with what you're talking about. Otherwise, all you have is this arsenal of information to provide to people in a way that's going to cause somebody to check out. We all know what it's like from a human nature, human attention standpoint to feel like you just got a bunch of information being delivered to you. You might feel that way right now as you're watching this, because this is very much a one-way conversation. So just think about that. I encourage you to think about, what would you feel like if you were the student? How can you really be the guide by understanding who they are and what they need? And the way that you do that is to ask questions. That's where the isolating and the understand comes into play. The overcome is not pushing somebody forward. It's matching up what the student needs to hear to help them over their hump in their own mind that they've sold themselves on. Hey, I can't go to school because of this reason. I'm never going to be able to do it. I can't pay for it. I don't have the time. I'm too busy. There's always a way for us to sell ourselves on something if we want to find that way. Your job as their guide is to help them figure out that a way is possible and to spend the time to walk them through that. So what I'm going to share on my screen right now is a resource that really kind of walks through the kind of what we talked about. So for time, you see here what it sounds like when we hear the student push back with a reasoning for why they can't go. I'm too busy. I don't have the time. I don't know how I'm going to fit it into my schedule. And then they start asking other questions to really kind of be stuck. Money. You're way more expensive than I can't afford to pay for school. You know, what, and then we move on to value. What job can I get with your degree? I'm not sure, you know, what degree or what program to take, right? Probably all things that you hear often. This is what the student is really saying to you. Hey, I don't know what to do. I'm not sure which path to take. I really need your help. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know how I'm going to pay for it. So rather than freezing in those moments, take the time to isolate and understand. That's where you ask questions. So asking questions based off what the student has shared. I'm not sure that I can fit school into my schedule. Okay, I hear you. It's a very real concern. You are a working adult. You have a lot on your plate. You shared with me that you have 2 children. I absolutely can see why you have that concern. Tell me a little bit more about that. Tell me a little bit more about your schedule. So rather than feeling like you have to pull questions out of thin air, which can be very daunting and challenging and intimidating for you, which is why we tend to shut down and want the conversation to end and want to rush off the phone, take some time to listen to what the student is saying and then build your question off of something that they've shared. That's going to feel like an entirely different conversation for you and for them. What that does for them is it feels like you're listening. It feels connected. It feels meaningful, and they're able to stay engaged. You know what it feels like when someone's just asking you random questions out of thin air and you're like, what? Where's that coming from? Why is that important? And when that happens, you over time start to check out because you're not feeling plugged in to that conversation. It almost feels like this foreign conversation that's happening. So to avoid that from happening, you have to be plugged in to the student and the conversation. That means not on your cell phone, not skimming your email, not responding to emails. One of the ways that I finally figured this out was I'm not saying this is going to work for you, but I would actually cover my eyes and look down so I could listen and focus. Your conversations with students, I can promise you, will not progress if you are not listening. They'll be short, 3 to 5, maybe 7-minute conversations that feel very transactional. And when you hang up the phone, it's going to be a 50-50 shot as to whether that student picks up the phone again, if you've set a next step or a follow-up. So in these 4 areas, listen for these cues of hesitation. Let that cue be your opportunity to understand and ask a question. This is a visual model for you to really think about that isolating, understanding, developing, and then offering. So developing would be you bringing the concern with what you have in your toolbox that's going to help ease that concern for the student. So now that I understand you're really concerned about how to pay for school, I need to now work with you to develop a financial picture of what does that look like? Breaking down the cost of school, breaking down what your options are, and then putting that in a ballpark, best case, worst case scenario for you, and then setting some next steps around how we're going to make you feel comfortable about the financial picture for school. If you don't spend time there, you're almost wasting your breath on every other part of your conversation. If you pass that off to financial aid, think about what that would feel like for you as a prospective student. Is that really meeting your need to be able to make a decision and move forward? How do you feel about the interaction that you're having with this guide and this expert that you really are in your seat? So I'm going to sum all this up today. We've talked about a lot. There's a lot that I'm sure we could continue to go through as it relates to this skill. Your 4 concerns: time, money, value, ability. Listen for those cues. Take those cues, develop questions based off of what the student is saying so that you can isolate, that you can understand, you can then develop a plan and offer that to the student. These conversations take a lot more time than 5 or 7 minutes. You're probably talking 20 or 30, not to put a timestamp on it, but they take a lot longer. But if you take a step back and really frame up who you are to this student, what you have to offer, and what you're doing in your role, spending this kind of time and really embracing the impact that you can have on a student will impact that student forever. So thank you again for joining me today. I hope you were able to take away some things that you're able to implement right away. I would love to hear about them. You can email me at jashbrook@elevatehighered, all one word, all lowercase, .org. If you'd like to reach out to me to explore ways that we can work with your team in a one-on-one or group or customized skill set coaching, that's what I do. That's what I'm passionate about. That's what I'm here to bring. And my goal, again, is to not only help develop you as counselors and leaders, but to really have that impact carry through for the student and your institution. So Thank you again for joining me. Be on the lookout for future coaching sessions, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.